What are y'all thoughts about where we are in the case?
Because the headlines keep saying sex parties, like it's a crime. But what's really on trial here is like unchecked power.
I'm disappointed in the trial itself because I thought it was going to be more.
It's like you watch a trailer, like, oh shit, this will be a good movie. And then you finally see the movie, like, oh damn, they put the best parts in the trailer.
As far as I'm concerned, I guess they made a case for domestic violence and state charges perhaps, but I don't think they made a case for Rico.
Maybe Diddy can come back.
Speaking of, since the Bush administration, I feel like that's how long Diddy's been popping, right? And up to this point, everybody been waiting for the downfall. But I don't know about y'all, the end of this case just kind of feels a little weird because they initially said, 8 weeks or something like that, right? We were expecting a little bit more of a robust defense from the defense, right? Or maybe a little bit more sizzle for the steak that the prosecution was serving up. But when it's all said and done, by the time the show airs, they would have just maybe completed. The defense would have, rested, right? The prosecution gave their summation or whatever. The case, for all intents and purposes, is over. All the witnesses have been called. I think the defense had maybe one witness, right? And then lo and behold, little trick. When there was time to deliver like the jury instructions, the prosecution decides, you know what? To streamline things, we're gonna drop a couple of these charges. You know what I'm saying? Like the arson one, for example, about the whole blowing up the car thing that nobody had any evidence for. That was nothing more than hearsay. But anyways, before we go into all that, what are y'all thoughts about where we are in the case? The case that started, Jesus, it feels like forever ago. We're coming towards the end of it. Can we just talk about what did you think about the prosecution, the case they laid out, the charges, how it kind of all ended, and with the defense giving their closing statements? What are your thoughts about this Diddy case? Any prognostications? What are your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm going to get out of the whether or not Cash is a victim thing. Everybody wants to say that. I want to focus on the unspoken person, people, community that's catching the stray from the Diddy trial. First, as far as the trial goes, I'm glad they're wrapping it up. I'm glad the defense didn't call any witnesses. I think it was smart. You can't call somebody to prove that something didn't happen. It's just, it's between two people. And if you weren't one of those people that was there. So I think they were smart to do that. Let it rest. I think the trial's done what it's supposed to do, and that was humiliate Diddy. And it's really unfortunate. And can he bounce back from this? Maybe. And I'm gonna tell you why I think maybe he can bounce back. Because the group that caught the stray right now are the lifestyle people, right? Lines keep saying sex parties, like it's a crime. But what's really on trial here is like unchecked power, maybe, maybe a little consent manipulation, possibly a confusion in a subculture or confusion with the subculture. I'd agree with that. But that's not the lifestyle, right? Because what they were doing out there, it wasn't centered on non-monogamy and freedom. There was some other stuff going on. That was rich men using access and aura as a cover for whatever abuse they might have had in their own personal life. That has nothing to do with all the people who are living free and loving however they want to love and having whatever expressions they want to have. So trying to throw the LS under the bus, like I feel like it's happening right now with this whole Diddy trial, it's the kink community's fault because we let Diddy lead for us. We let him speak for us. We let him try to represent us. Now, his bounce back, maybe Diddy can come back. He can clear it up. Because over here in the LS, we got rules. And he would know that. We got red lights, green lights, safe words, aftercare. What he's accused of is like having a cocktail, having a cult full of cocktails. No pun intended. So, long story short, I feel like people need, hopefully this will spread some light on what it really is like to have consensual, absolute fun with adults who are not being bounded by other people's constraints, and realize that there's nothing creepy, right, or cruel or coercive about that, right? That's why I see with the Diddy trial. I'm glad we can get out the way. We can stop besmirching these other people who have nothing to do with that foolishness and get back to hearing good music, having great conversation.
So I am not going to go a certain way. I'm probably going to say that I'm kind of disappointed. I think, and I'm not disappointed in the fact that I'm disappointed in the trial itself. Because I thought it was going to be more. Like when they first started talking about this deal, like they had 100 witnesses. I ain't see 100 witnesses. They talked about they had this, they had that, they had transcript, they had tapes, they had this. And while I understand that as the public, we're not exactly privy to all of that because it's in the behind scenes, it's the trial and whatnot, and we won't be privy to it's all over with and done with. Based on what we saw in the public, though, I don't think they actually got a case. Like, because then they dropped, first of all, the kidnapping charge was BS on multiple cases because they was trying to tie the kidnapping to the folks who was coming. And I guess maybe it's the folks who stayed for 3-4 days because they was too dehydrated and he provided hydration and medical care. I don't know exactly why they put the kidnapping charge on there. The arson charge, since Kid Cudi never acknowledged, well, he acknowledged, but it was like rumor and so forth. I understood why they dropped that. So basically, I felt like they threw everything under at him that they could possibly throw, hoping that something to stick. It was like the spaghetti on the wall, like, oh yeah, it's going to stick. And what ended up happening was that there's a good chance he might walk. And so as far as I'm concerned, I guess they made a case for domestic violence and state charges perhaps, but I don't think they made a case for Rico. And to be honest, I thought it was going to be more like evidence that was coming out that was like this. And when the defense rested, and so originally the defense wasn't planning on calling any witnesses. So the fact that they may have called one, I'm actually pretty surprised because at first they weren't planning on calling any because they were resting on the fact that, hey, this is just about sex and power. And you try and bring this man down because of his sexual, proclivities, And so it was like almost like the defense took it as a joke. Even when they asked Diddy how he was doing or how he was feeling, the judge was laughing at Diddy's response, like, oh, ha, 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 ha. And I don't know what to take of this case. I can just say I'm disappointed, though, because if you're going to go for Rico, and I assumed that it was going to be like clear cut, Al Capone type clear cut, every Rico case in the book type clear cut. And at the minimum, maybe financial, I don't even know. Let me stop. The point is, it was lackluster. I thought it was going to last longer. I think 50 Cent made this even more exciting than what it actually was just because 50 hated him. That beef was like, oh, 50 got beef. 50 dropped a Netflix before he even got, and I'm now expecting like Surviving Diddy after this. And so I think there's going to be a lot of people who make money off of this, to include those people who came and spoke or testified. But I don't think that it's going to be as clear cut as folks assume it's going to be at this point, because I don't think they proved Rico.
Listen, man, it's funny because I was sitting here as I was talking, thinking about the position I took very early on. I think it was, or at least in the trial, right? I said that I think the prosecution has a case for the things they will try him for. The challenge is going to be whether or not the average juror can get past all of the salaciousness for the most part. That was like by and large, because I still feel like if you look at technically the charges, right? Racketeering, I believe, was one. There were 2 charges of traveling across state lines for prostitution. And I think it was 2 counts of sex trafficking or something like that, which are not very hard charges to necessarily prove, right? If you're talking about, was this person a prostitute? Did they travel for the purpose of this? Check, right? Was he using his business to necessarily facilitate these events and freak-offs? Check, right? So honestly, I kind of still feel the same, right? That I think is going to ultimately still end up with him being found guilty. Or at least it rests on whether or not the prosecution did a good enough job on just making the case about the case. And if the jurors feel the same way that S&M does, and also the same way that I do, I think you're likely to maybe even get a conviction in that way, right? Because if it just boils down to sex, that was the challenge I thought from the very beginning. Because if the persons or the people can see this as being something that was consensual, right? Just by and large, right? Women nowadays have kind of muddied the waters in terms of what's professional prostitution anyway, right? So my body, my choice. And we become more liberal in that way. So I think that part's going to be hard to stick. But if people believe that some of the people who testified were willing participants or driving some of these events, then I can see them saying, well, what's the criminality here? Right? To a certain extent, right? So I think that's what it rests on, the sex, which is what they wanted in the first place. The question becomes, how does the average person go through all that sex to kind of find the truth? And the truth, I believe, is the prosecution did prove their case. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that Diddy's going away forever, right? Because yes, I think these charges are serious, but even the underlying charges, it's not like there's murder on there or some of the more capital offenses. And I think because when we hear Rico, they're typically used in cases where those things exist. We think that the punishment is going to rise to the level of that, even if they're using the language to kind of prove the point. But I don't think that's going to be the case here, right? I do think it might be a situation where he gets a little bit of time and then eventually is able to come back out. But honestly, to your point, S&M, I agree wholeheartedly. For a lot of the viewing public who came into this case wondering if this was nothing more than some trumped up shit, no pun intended specifically, in terms of the whole Cassie situation, they're kind of left saying, it still feels that way. And I can't be mad if they feel that way about it. You know what I'm saying? I just feel like the taxpayers' dollars were maybe ill spent. I heard the prosecutor wanted to kind of get ahead of the fact that the defense attorney might have mentioned something about that, which would have been prudent to me to do so, because it's like at the end of the day, not saying they weren't victims. I just think this was one of the most flimsiest cases that we'll see from the feds. And maybe somebody just seemed a little over anxious to push this case. And so almost all the conspiracy theorists, all the people who believe that Diddy was being done wrong a certain type of way, can probably look at this case and still feel that way. Because it wasn't like the prosecution really proved the monster that even some of us thought he might have been. And that's the funny part, right? Because in our language, there's this one thing that one person said on a podcast, right? They were like, for all the shit that you heard about Diddy being funny or, part of the community or, homosexual or whatever, you didn't hear any of that here. Like, even though some of the things he did, people kind of question whether or not, but you didn't hear about him actually engaging with. So it's kind of like, y'all did all this, and what dirt or what tea did y'all spill for real, for real? We were hearing about the baby oil and all that, long ago. Like, if that was it, it's like you watch a trailer, you're like, oh shit, this will be a good movie. And then you finally see the movie, like, oh, damn. They put the best parts in the trailer. So, I mean, listen, thoughts and prayers to everybody, because we don't want to necessarily make light for those people who might feel victimized. I also do want to mention, though, recently, the Puff and his son, there's a lawsuit that just came out where they're being accused of a group essay, which is, and a lawsuit just was filed. So I don't think it's going to be the last that we hear of these types of things. And so even if he does, kind of somehow move past this criminal case, I'm sure there's going to be still people lining up to find a way to seek justice in their own way.